Alrighty, guys, we are going to waste no time. It's the match I think a lot of people have been hyped about, myself. But we are going to be getting on into it now. It is FanTaSy versus SortOf. Terran Korean versus Foreign Zerg, spawning up the top right-hand side of the map. Playing for his old team, Dead Pixels, it is FanTaSy. And his opponent spawning down the bottom left-hand side of the map. It is SortOf, the Swedish Zerg. So this is going to be a very exciting series. It's going to be a tall order for whoever advances to defeat the current champion Solar. But either one of these guys playing him will be an exciting match to watch. But it's a Terran versus Zerg. Now, I think we'll see kind of a different playstyle out of SortOf than we did out of Solar. I mean, it could be very similar. I feel as if we'll see things maybe be a little bit more closer. Like SortOf may try and get to certain strategies quicker than Solar would, whereas Solar plays very safe when he does sort of tech up. I mean, we saw Bunny, he didn't really have any room to get anything done to Solar, whereas I feel as if FanTaSy may find an angle to get in on SortOf here. Thanks to everyone for tuning on in. If you'd be so kind to leave a favorite or a one-up for the stream. And we're going to be moving on to the best of 7 after this best of 5. But I mean, the best of 5 can go a long ways. The last one was pretty short. We'll see how this one goes. FanTaSy is moving out with a scouting SCV. I honestly like to see that when you're versus a Zerg that you're unfamiliar with. It's pretty much either be very risky or make the commitment to send the SCV scout across, or keep your Reaper back at home, but that can really delay the sort of scout and harassment. A Marine on the way for FanTaSy, going to be able to zone out Overlords here. And the map is Blue Shift, by the way, pardon me. Double Queens. Reaper is out at the third base, going to be wanting to deny this, and it's possible he'll be able to get the drone. We'll see how well FanTaSy micros this. Maybe able to block the drone, and he does. Nicely done. So that's already a bit of a wrench thrown into the plans of SortOf. That third base being delayed, SortOf trying to get out a very quick one, but that did not happen. Now we've got the Reaper. It is kiting back. It needs to be careful not to move out too far. FanTaSy wants to poke and prod with this as much as he can. It looks like he's going to be going into that standard sort of Hellion map control after this. We'll see. Starport coming up next. There we are. Third base still being denied here by FanTaSy. That drone's trying to come into position. We'll see. He may still be able to block it. Throws a grenade. Bounces the Queen back. He wants to get the drone, but he's not going to be able to get it. So he just has to get out of there with the Reaper. Still, he knows the Zerg player is going in towards that third base. Double Hellions are on the way there. Reaper's poking around, and the fact that he already denied the third base and got that drone is a nice start for FanTaSy. We'll see what Solar's plan is to follow this up with, or SortOf's plan. It's a bit rough, guys, having SortOf and then Solar play right after each other in the same matchup as Zergs. I'm going to be honest with you. So, we'll see this Marine working away on this Overlord. It will go down. It does get in. Sees Stim Pack being researched. I mean, that can always be swapped over to be a Banshee. But I have a feeling FanTaSy wants out his quick Stim. And that we'll likely see a third base relatively soon. Just looking at that wall, that's asking for a command center right there. Now, with that Liberator on the way, with the Hellions, which can poke and prod, FanTaSy may be able to get something done, but SortOf is a solid Zerg player, so he shouldn't really take too much damage from something like this. The Liberator is a bit out there. Maybe able to deny mining at the third base, maybe get some larva. As it is a bit late for SortOf, so we'll just have to see. FanTaSy is poking and prodding, trying to keep the Queens up the front, and he's doing just that. FanTaSy, or SortOf, is making a few lings here, but the Liberator's coming on in, and he's going to need Queens to defend this. Liberator getting in on the third base. Fast reaction time from SortOf. However, drones that were were rallied towards the third base are going to go in there and go down, so 3 kills already gone down. make that a fourth with that other drone popping in. Now the queens are going to eat some shots from this Liberator. We'll see if there's transfuse. One queen already goes down, so FanTaSy already finding some nice room there. Does lose one queen. Hellions get in there, possibly going to be able to pick off another queen. A transfuse goes down to save it though, but 5 drones is no small amount of damage for this early on in TVZ. When FanTaSy is macroing up, he's getting up his third base. Double eBay's on the way. Going to be getting up all his production there. So SortOf is going to need to pull himself together here if he's going to be able to hold on what's coming. I mean, he knows the storm is going to be brewing at this point. This was not a heavy commitment from FanTaSy, just a bit of harassment that got some nice damage done here. The Hellions still out on the map, able to poke and prod for now. SortOf forcing him back, however. His creep spread, as a result, has been denied a little bit, or delayed a little bit here. Hellions pulling back. FanTaSy not wasting any time, floating that third base over. He's got a siege tank out, so he's going to be playing this siege tank bio, getting up some more barracks. We'll see an armory soon, I imagine. That's the next step, as he'll head towards his 2-2. SortOf getting his own 1-1 on the way, though. So these guys, I mean, it's not like SortOf's in a horrible position, but he could be in a better one. We didn't see Solar losing 5 drones to something like this. That said, we didn't see this sort of strategy come out. Also, thank you very much for the balloons, BWV659. I appreciate the support a lot. Armory is on the way there. If you are having issues with the stream buffering too much, you can always try switching from Flash to HTML, to my knowledge, but if you do have any complaints about the stream, I will certainly pass them on to Afreeca when it comes to any tech issues or anything like that. Queen's getting on top of these Hellions, going to be forcing them back. SortOf's creep spread is now really getting established. These Marines are unloading though, and FanTaSy will spread it, or sort of clean it up on the right side. This fourth base will be exposed a little bit. Lings are going to be coming in, but it's not that many. There is going to be Banelings here, but SortOf is going to try and force FanTaSy back. FanTaSy getting that focus fire down. Now he's going to dive right on into the main base. There's only one queen here. Queens are moving towards the third base right now, SortOf trying to make sure that there's no room for FanTaSy just to leap back and forth. FanTaSy enjoying this freedom of movement here. FanTaSy can't really poke in. Baneling speed is on the way. He's focusing down some Banelings like a champ, though. I mean, for someone who just came back, when FanTaSy left the scene, I don't think focusing down Banelings was such a common thing, and now he's quickly picking up on it, which is always exciting to see, as opposed to just trying to be stuck in his ways. No, he's fully accepting the new meta. SortOf trying to go for a run by, however, FanTaSy definitely sees this. Or maybe he didn't. These Banelings are morphing. The supply depot wall could be under fire, however, there's 2 siege tanks there. So 3 siege tanks, 4 siege tanks actually, so I think FanTaSy's gonna say good luck trying to get a Ling run by on that. Lings are gonna try and get on top of this, but for now, Hydras are gonna be coming out, so it is gonna be a little bit tougher for FanTaSy to bounce around for now though. However, just looking at the way he's been macroing up these guys, they're on relatively equal supply, and at this point the Zerg player does want to be a bit ahead. FanTaSy's going in towards the 4th base, getting up his 2-2 there. This potential run by from SortOf. Maybe a long time before he gets up to a chance to do something with that. FanTaSy poking in, gets the queen. Oh, loses a medivac though, unfortunately. Unloads immediately. He's really trying to keep the pressure on. He's got these 2 groups of units from the north and south. Needs to get out of there with the Hydras out. With SortOf really maxing out now. He's it's harder to find room. We've got a hive on the way now for SortOf. Feelings going down for SortOf. We now see these Marines are stimming forward, picking off a creep tumor there. More this counterattack has been called upon. We'll see. Looks like so far FanTaSy getting out without too many losses, and he's up to 4 bases. SortOf's going into this Hydraling Bane. However, FanTaSy's already on 4 bases. He's been building up a siege tank count, so it could be a bit rough for Swedish Zerg this game. The map is relatively small. Blue Shift is not one of these larger maps. And FanTaSy, it doesn't take him long to move out, and with all these siege tanks, it could be very tough for SortOf to get on top of his opponent right now. It looks like that the 5th base of SortOf will be cancelled or killed here. Oh, was it? He actually saves it. That's quite impressive there. Focus firing not really going down there. Now, SortOf needs to be careful here not to run into these siege tanks. He's eaten a few shots there. He's kiting back. These Hydras don't have their muscular augments yet, and it looks like most of this army is forced to engage them. The Banelings rolling forward, getting a few connections. However, it looks like these Hydras will be chased down. Both these guys are maxed out, so we're at that stage in which anything can happen in this game still. However, FanTaSy is in a pretty good situation for now. The siege tanks are now moving forward. He's getting on creep there. Overlords are actually being shredded here. A few misrallied there for SortOf. Now, this is the thing I've been worried about. These siege tanks are almost going to be like a noose tightening around the neck of SortOf. I mean, there's not a lot of angles for him to come in for a surround. He never broke down these rocks, and he's busy defending a drop here. So as FanTaSy pushes forward, he's also harassing down south. Drones are going down. SortOf really needs to get a nice engagement to clean this up, but he is just on Hydraling Bane. He's got a ton of Zerglings here. However, it's going to be a little bit worrying. Now here comes the main force of FanTaSy. How many Banelings are there? There's 38 Banelings. However, Banelings versus tanks never really have worked well. A counterattack is going down. However, FanTaSy has another wall off at this base. Now we're gonna see it's kind of turning into a pseudo base trade. SortOf just abandoning this base, I think, is the right call. Banelings are rolling forward now. He wants to get on top of the production, which could force FanTaSy back home. We'll just have to wait and see. Base trading a Zerg is not usually ideal for Terran, but we'll just have to see how this works out. SortOf going to want to be producing as many Banelings as he can back at home if he ever sort of can take a fight and catch his opponent off guard. It looks like the production of FanTaSy has been compromised for now, though, so we'll see. It looks like FanTaSy, though, he's committing. This is the sort of FanTaSy style. He's not pulling back. He's just going for broke. Right now, we've seen 28 SCVs go down, but it does come down to the army right now, and this is a scary army here for FanTaSy. It's going to be very tough. Some Marauders, some units going down there, but it looks like there may just be too much, and that is the case. FanTaSy, while getting hit hard back at home, made the commitment. We are in the second match. Very well played by FanTaSy. Was a bit rough for SortOf there. I mean, he took a bit of damage at the start, and then the game sort of just built on top of that with the eventual win for FanTaSy. We're getting into SortOf's map pick. That smaller one was FanTaSy's choice, so maybe he planned to play that way. The next map is Lost and Found. This is the well-known map here. So we'll see if SortOf can really hit his stride there. Hello, Jackson. Yeah, it was great that Bunny stepped up to come and be a replacement for Special. It's very nice having players who are just willing to jump into a tournament at the last minute. So we'll be getting on into the next game. It's a best of 5. There's going to be room for SortOf to bring it back. Either way, a FanTaSy versus Solar match would be very hype. That would be a very good test for the skill of FanTaSy, but Solar certainly isn't. I mean, SortOf certainly isn't out of it just yet. We're going to have to see how many times they do that. Looking at the replay coming through here on the stream with the delay, I mean, maybe if SortOf went for a move like that a little bit sooner, he could have convinced FanTaSy to pull back, but FanTaSy had already killed the base. He was already just about, like, he had his hands around the neck of SortOf when SortOf went for that counterattack. It was a little bit too late there. But spawning up the top right-hand side of the map, representing his team Dead Pixels, it is FanTaSy. And his opponent spawning down the bottom left-hand side of the map, it is SortOf. So we'll just have to see what SortOf's going to do on this map. Lost and Found. I wouldn't I would kind of be surprised if we saw an early pool out of SortOf, but I just completely ate my words there. I mean, he's a very macro-oriented guy, but it's possible he'll be able to destabilize FanTaSy with something like this. I mean, on Lost and Found, which is a very standard map, I am a little bit surprised that he chose to go for this here, as opposed to just trying to play his straight-up macro, but part of being a StarCraft 2 player is being unpredictable here. So, SortOf, we'll see how he plans to play this out. I mean, you get the feelings, you try and deny the base. FanTaSy, we'll see what sort of opening he goes for. He did good work with the Reaper, but I believe he moved out with it immediately. And interestingly enough, I mean, FanTaSy did SCV scout versus SortOf last game, so he very well could do it again this game. Queen back on the way at home for SortOf. That's what you get when you get the early pool. You also get the early queen for a bit of extra larva at the cost of your later hatchery. It's not too big of an economic blow going for this build. Now we'll see how many lings. 6 lings is the amount that SortOf has gone for. Solar, when he did it versus Bunny, went for 4. So we'll just have to see. FanTaSy going for the Reaper. We'll see if he goes for the Marine afterwards. That can be a big deal when it comes to holding this. Or whether he'll go right into a reactor. He's going for a supply depot, and the lack of Marine means that this is indeed just going to be right into a reactor. So this could be a little bit rough for FanTaSy. He's moving out, and he didn't SCV scout. So this is some StarCraft 2 mind games. He SCV scouted the first game not knowing his opponent, but this time he's going to be in a bit of trouble right now. Lings are going to be sectioned off to kill this SCV to delay this command center. And now they can start working on the reactor, which cannot be repaired, and it's possible he'll be able to kill this. And I think he actually is going to be able to. We'll see if FanTaSy throws something up to complete the wall once more. But no, the Lings are actually going to get in, so while this third base is being delayed, he may be able to get an SCV here. One of the Lings has gone down, but a lot of mining time being denied here. FanTaSy trying to get back to it. This Reaper will come in to eventually help with this. FanTaSy sent another SCV down, but that one will go down as well. So, SortOf getting a nice bit of damage done here. Maybe able to get one more SCV. It looks like it won't go down, but already getting the reactor was a very nice touch. He delayed the CC a bit. He pulled the Reaper back at home. And I would consider that a successful attack through the 2 SCVs. The mining time delayed. FanTaSy's build messed up without a doubt. He's not going to be able to get out the Hellions that he wanted to as quick. He's now got the starport on the way. So, very nice. SortOf getting in the early licks this game. And the 2 SCVs, the denied mining time really... I mean, you can get more damage done. Sometimes, I mean, if the... Like, for example, we saw what happened versus Bunny where he just went for the Marine and that was pretty much it. So, we shall see how FanTaSy's going to move forward in this game. Marines being produced here by FanTaSy. It's possible that this is going to be a Hellbat Medivac timing. He's got 100 gas. Opts for a Viking, though. And no armory has been thrown down just yet. So he's just going to be moving out, going for this 3 Hellion drop here. Marines back at home. And then he's going to be making a siege tank. So it's possible we'll just see him go into a 3rd base here. For now, though, wants to get a bit of damage done with this Hellion drop. We'll see if SortOf is expecting this. He's spreading creep into his main base. He's got the Overlord in position, so he won't be completely caught off guard by this drop coming in. Queens and Lings working away on these rocks, but eventually he's going to have to come back. We'll see how FanTaSy gets in with these Hellions. He's maybe going to be able to get a few good shots off. Already killed off 1 drone. Going to be getting some more. 2 drones have gone down so far, making that 5. These Hellions not being reacted to fast enough by SortOf when more and more drones are being killed off. He's splitting up his units, but 9 have gone down so far. Where are the Zerglings? They're just coming back down now, and 10 drones have gone down, and this is going to be putting FanTaSy in a fantastic spot. He's got SCC up on the way back home. He's making a Liberator for more harassment. He's got a tank for safety. More barracks are now on the way for FanTaSy. A potential Ling run by is moving out for SortOf. He knows he took damage and he wants to sort of get something. to work his way back into this game, because he now is going to be behind a little bit. I mean, he got that nice bit of damage early on, but then FanTaSy finding a move of his own, so very well played by FanTaSy for that. And now he's heading into a sort of similar playstyle to the last game, going to be building up that siege tank count, getting his upgrades. His third base is finished up. And now SortOf might not have a choice just to macro up. I think it's time. He's probably going to have to throw up a fourth base. He's going into a lair already, so maybe Mutalisk or something along those lines. He's got 4 gases. He's actually going to be going into 6 gases, so this is kind of screaming Mutalisk, but we'll just have to see what that's going to do. I think we'll need to see Mutas and Baneling speed start right away if he is just going to be playing this Ling Bane style. Could always be for a Hydra Den, but I don't think he'd need that much gas for a Hydralisk Den. There's the Baneling nest on the way. We'll see if there's going to be a Spire on the way for SortOf too. I mean, he's mining out of all of his gases here. No Spire just yet, so I'm wondering when he's going to start that, or if he's going to start that Spire. Because you don't need 6 gases just for Ling Bane, unless he's going to be making a lot of Banes. So he does, though, start a Hydralisk Den, so not opting to go for those Mutalisks there. Going to be spending that, I guess, that gas on Hydras and Banelings, so... We now see this drop is going to be moving out for FanTaSy. Just 1 Medivac full. Going to try and get anything done that he can. Lings do spot this. SortOf did have good creep spread in the past game, and now he's got these queens. He should be able to shut this drop down with relative ease here. FanTaSy forced back immediately. One going to be finishing up for both these players. Armory on the way for FanTaSy, going to be going towards this 2-2. Just macroing up while this goes on, getting up his 4th base already. Siege tanks on the way, nothing out of the ordinary here for FanTaSy. It's just showing that he wants to macro, wants to go for a timing eventually. Now we'll see how SortOf is going to get ready to eventually face this. We saw in the last game that he didn't really have a response, and then it got a little too close for him. And eventually he just fell to FanTaSy there. So now FanTaSy moving out with this drop. Maybe going to try and deny a bit more creep. SortOf doing good creep spread. I mean, the more creep you spread, the more time you have when an attack comes. The creep spread up north has been denied a little bit, so it would be good to see some more tumors start up there for SortOf. For now, though, he is reacting to this drop. Scan on the main base coming down from FanTaSy. He hasn't seen the Hydralisk Den yet. And Hydras are just being made for SortOf, so he's playing into greedy as that he's just going to make his army after he's already hit this high drone count. Some Overlords on the way, 2-2 on the way here. Eventually these guys are going to clash, but SortOf is just not really panicking or anything that he took that bit of damage early on. He's just macroing up. He's now up to a healthy drone count, and eventually he's going to face the army of FanTaSy. Now, an answer to the siege tanks is going to be needed. It's just a lot of siege tanks, but they can cover all those marines that FanTaSy has. FanTaSy going up to 8 barracks here. Fourth command center is flying over. Hive is on the way for SortOf, so eventually he'll be able to get to another tech. I'd maybe like to see Vipers as the tech of choice, but I don't think he'll be able to get them out by the time the attack comes, so maybe he does need to put on the aggression for himself. He's looking to attack FanTaSy here. FanTaSy has his interesting wall going on at this location, but I kind of like it. I mean, as long as he's expanding up north, this is one hell of a wall from FanTaSy. Now FanTaSy trying to secure his 4th base. SortOf going up towards his 5th base. No drops really in position to attack this for now. So SortOf should be uncontested there. Even the sensor tower and the siege tank for FanTaSy just gonna make this position very defensible. Defend from those Ling run-bys. Maybe that's something that Bunny needed versus Solar. Although Solar was very eager to crack those bases with Banelings. Medivac moving out. Gonna be moving right over the army here. See all those Banelings. It looks like that SortOf's actually going for it. Sees that some of the buy wasn't there to defend the tanks, and is gonna try and get a trade. Banelings rolling in, getting some decent connections there. A lot of the Banes have gone down, however, they're actually getting on top of a lot of the army right now. I'm looking at this. FanTaSy's lost a lot of supply. He's got a few siege tanks further back. he's going to try and deal with the Banes that way. However, he may be taking a lot of SCV damage right now. SCVs are running for their lives. It looks like they may actually have just escaped. 8 have gone down, but the Planetary's still standing strong. And SortOf, while going for that attack, he was so close to getting the Baneling connection there at the third base, but ultimately did not. A drop to the north there by FanTaSy trying to make something happen, but really just denying a bit of creep. Gonna need to get out of there. It looks like he may lose this Medivac and lose those units. Yeah, he does. So SortOf now taking the lead. He's got his 5th base up. Double Liberator harassment moving out for FanTaSy. FanTaSy has another CC up. He's making siege tanks once again, but SortOf is heading into that Greater Spire, eventually going to hit those Broodlords. And this is a situation we've seen a lot of Terrans get into lately, in which they have the bio, they have the tanks, because they wanted to sort of crack the Zerg, but then eventually the Zerg hits Broodlords, and the Terrans don't have much of an answer. So we're going to see if FanTaSy, he is going to be dropping, which is always good to see. Now we're going to see if he's going to be going into Ghosts, and that is the tech of choice. It's either Vikings or Ghosts to deal with that usually, and Ghosts are the sort of one that fits better with bio. So 4 Ghosts on the way at a time for FanTaSy. He does have a good economy. He's getting towards his 5th base, denying creep. That Liberator harassment was shut down. Now there's all these Vipers for SortOf. They don't have that much energy, so they will need to build some up. 5th base being forced back for now by SortOf. FanTaSy's got a decent bank for now, though, so it's not urgent that he gets this base up, but if he does want to keep growing, he does need to get it up. Corruptors are now on the way. 7 Corruptors, so that's at least 7 Broodlords, and we're currently just looking at 4 Ghosts for FanTaSy. He's making Liberators, which are very effective at killing Broodlings and forcing a stalemate. But eventually he will need something to shut these down. He's getting out a Fusion Core, most likely for Liberator range. Not likely gonna see BCs, I don't think. A Ghost did go down there. A few snipes popped as well. I think a Viper may have gone down. Yeah, a Ghost for a Viper. That's a pretty equal trade. We're now seeing Broodlords on the way up now. I'm not sure if FanTaSy is aware of this just yet. I mean, he knows it's an uncontested Zerg, that this Zerg is going to be teching. FanTaSy's got his +3. He doesn't have his armor. He's making a lot of Liberators for now. 4 Broodlords are on the way. It looks like FanTaSy's going to try and hold here. He has yet to see the Broodlords. Where, as a matter of fact, where are those Broodlords? There they are. They're sort of just sitting at a range of that sensor tower. Looks like SortOf taking a fight without him, though. Liberators are an anchor for FanTaSy, and he's standing strong. This base is still alive and kicking. Now, there's only 3 Ghosts. 3 more are on the way, so it's going to be 5 Broodlords versus 6 Ghosts. The Liberators will help force a stalemate. The Marines can always try and get on top of the army, so... But it does look like that SortOf is in a pretty good spot. Scans go down on this now, so he sees the Greater Spire. Drop at the 6th base. The Liberator harassment going down, nicely done there. We're even seeing a Raven on the way for FanTaSy, interestingly enough. Vikings on the way, Ravens. He's getting up another starport. Cloak is now on the way for his Ghosts. Advanced Ballistics. So this is an interesting tech of choice. I guess maybe going to try and use the Liberator's Splash to kill those Broodlords with the Raven anti-armor missile. Liberator's working away on these Broodlings, but for now they're relatively uncontested. The Ghosts will need to get snipes off. Cloak is not done for the Ghosts yet, though, so they can always be abducted by these Vipers wherever they are. But FanTaSy, it looks like he may be getting forced back. Tank's not too good in this situation here. Planetary needs to be repaired if SortOf is going to buy time. Looks like the Hydras are going to move forward, pick off these Liberators here. Planetary is being repaired, but it's a little bit too late, and there's just too much Zerg. So FanTaSy's losing a base and being forced back. He's going for some more Liberator harassment on SortOf. However, losing that base is a pretty big blow. Eventually, he may need to start or see expanding down south as an option here, just to try and keep growing. 5 Infestors are on the way, so SortOf getting up a lot of these tech units. He's got the Broodlords, he's got the Vipers, he's now getting into the Infestors here. So this is a this could be a pretty late game TVZ. There is the wall, though, which is still going to help defend from this. Lings are getting onto this wall. Going to be knocking this down. These Lings, I believe they have adrenal glands, so yes, they do. Going to be able to tear through these things, particularly with their +3. FanTaSy now getting +2 armor as well, that wall taking a bit of damage. He will want to rebuild or replace that. For now, he is on 4 bases, and it's getting to the time in which he needs a 5th, or he needs to get some very good damage done. He can trade. He's going into this sort of late game common Terran style, which Terrans see as their option. He's making Vikings, he's making Ghosts, he's getting nukes, he's made a Raven or 2. Siege tank goes down, nice pick off there. Good raise on the depot, but a number of Lings is the least of FanTaSy's problems for now. He's gone for a drop. Those Marauders eat a lot of Banelings, but they do get picked off. And SortOf is on a good number of bases. He's going to be able to keep this harassment up with his economy. This Siege tank's going to try and shut down these Lings. They are forced back there. And now FanTaSy, he's retaking this 5th base here. So he really needs to hold on to this. I mean, if SortOf attacks and he loses this base again, it's essentially game, I'd have to say. Spore Crawler's moving forward for SortOf, sort of being the... this is a bit of a stalemate. Bio moving forward to work on those. Needs to be careful of the Infestors, though. FanTaSy's army is so clumped up. Fungal Growth goes down, catches a good chunk of the Bio there. Now the Ghosts, Vikings, and Raven are all going to have a tall order to deal with this. The army is relatively clumped, though, for SortOf. An anti-armor missile could be very effective here. Looks like FanTaSy going for a nuke while all this is going on, but he needs to hold the 5th base, or else he's in a whole world of trouble right now. And he's sort of pushed FanTaSy out of this position. No EMPs or anything. There's always parasitic bombs. There's fungal to shut down these Vikings, and it looks like the planetary is going to go down. It wasn't repaired in time by FanTaSy, and nuke's going down while all this is going on. However, FanTaSy is going to be in a very rough situation right now. The Ghosts are there, but SortOf shutting down this base is exactly what he needed to do. Looks like FanTaSy wants to get some snipes off, but there's so many spellcasters for SortOf here. Another nuke is on the way. That nuke, not sure that it killed too much there. That Ghost is going to be chased away. 12 Ghosts are out for FanTaSy, so he's going to have this very strong army here. He's actually taking a fight right now. Vikings working away on this army. Parasitic Bomb goes down on the Vikings. They can't split either because they had the fungal there on them. So FanTaSy may just be losing out in the late game to SortOf here right now. There's just simply too many Corruptors in the air, too many Broodlords. A lot of the Ghosts have gone down, and with losing this base over and over, FanTaSy wasn't really in the position to play this sort of style versus SortOf, pardon me. And now he's going for one last fight, but there's Hydras on the ground. Some EMPs go off on the casters, but there's too many Corruptors. There's too many Broodlords, I believe. Some snipes going down. The Bio's coming forward, but these Banelings are going to dispatch that, and GG gets called. SortOf ties the series 1-1. Very well played by SortOf there. We're going to be getting on into the next match. And that was SortOf's map pick there. First one went to FanTaSy. Now the next map is going to be FanTaSy's map pick. It's going to be Dreamcatcher. Quite a good map for Terran tanks and whatnot. Thanks to everyone for tuning on into this tournament. Thank you for Miss Momo for the 1 balloon. We're going to get these guys into the lobby, and then we'll get on into the next game. We have a series on our hands, though. And keep in mind, guys, after this, the winner is going to play Solar in a best of 7. Thanks to everyone for tuning on in. Make sure to share the stream. We've been doing these events for a while, and I think we're going to keep on doing them. But we're getting into the next match. It's great to have a guy like FanTaSy coming back to pro gaming. Just, FanTaSy came back. I mean, a lot of people thought, okay, maybe he'll go to Brood War like some of the other Koreans have done. But no, apparently FanTaSy likes StarCraft 2 and wants to return to being a pro gamer, and he's rising up once again. So that's very exciting, but we're now in the game. It's the best of 5. Spawning up in the top left-hand side of the map, it's Dead Pixel's FanTaSy. Doesn't want this series to get out of his hands. And now his opponent, the Foreign Hope, spawning down in the bottom right-hand side of the map. It is SortOf living and training in Korea. SortOf opened up that previous game with his early pool. Now, we'll just have to see what the plan is for this game. I mean, FanTaSy got some good damage done with those Hellions. SortOf got the early Ling damage, so... But it was nice that SortOf was able to come back to eventually shut down FanTaSy. The much larger map made it tougher for FanTaSy to just get a decisive move out. And so we'll just have to see how FanTaSy's going to play it. He eventually tried going into the late game phase, but losing that 5th base really was what did him in. Just sort of getting the positioning that he wanted. FanTaSy did a good job trying to keep on the harassment. The Liberators did work. The odd drop here and there. The drops never got too much damage done. But as long as you're keeping pressure on your opponent, that is very important. SCV Scout moving out for FanTaSy once again. So far, we haven't seen any real cheese. I mean, we had the aggressive opening from SortOf in the previous game. Now we will just have to see what FanTaSy is going to do in this one. I imagine it's going to be that that Ling or that tank Marine. It's just very good on this map. So if you've been doing it on other ones, you probably want to do it on this one. I don't think we'll see any mech out of FanTaSy. Reaper moving out. Early pool timing was confirmed, so now the Reaper can move out freely. 3rd base is going to be going up for SortOf. We'll see if the Reaper gets there in time to deny it. It may just. I believe the drone will be able to save itself. Yeah, it's hanging out by that geyser. The Reaper is indeed looking for it. Now the choice is FanTaSy going to go into the main base, or is he just going to try and get the drone here? He's eventually going to try and... eventually that's going to have to be cancelled, or the drone will die. There's nothing really coming out to save it. The Lings can't move out. Oh, and he actually manages to get it again. Very nicely done there. FanTaSy didn't manage to block it with the Reaper. And the Queen's coming out, so it looks like SortOf has managed to keep the drone alive at minimal expense. SortOf right now is just looking at this while trying not to skip any macro. Gets cancelled there, but now the Queen's in position to force this Reaper away. Defending its drone. And the 3rd base goes up. So now here we are. The natural is up for FanTaSy. Didn't really get anything done with the Reaper. He confirmed the 3rd base though, so nothing too major to worry about. Stim is on the way for FanTaSy back at home. Looks like we're seeing a 2-1-1 out of him. This is exciting to see how he's going to execute this build. 2-1-1. I mean, it's one of those builds. It's so figured out. The Zergs know they need to make 32 Lings and have their Queens in position to deal with it. But we still see pro players using it because it still finds room. It's one of those things. And I think the 2-1-1 is going to be a build that sticks around for a long... Well, it's already been all around a long time. But now... And now with the 2-on-1 being figured out, it's just one of those builds. Players got to react to it. We'll see double eBay up from FanTaSy. So Terrans do tend to stick with their upgrades on 2 bases when doing this. Now, SortOf did come in with that overlord. He saw the reactor on the starport, and that's pretty much confirmation that it's going to be a 2-1-1. He's making a Baneling nest back at home. I believe he made a spore crawler somewhere, possibly in the main base to zone. Yeah, to zone those medivacs. Lings are in position waiting. Queen's at the 3rd base here, so we'll see where FanTaSy's going. It looks like he's going towards the main base. Missing a few Marines there, though. Just wanting to go. Lifting the starport off, starting a barracks. Going to be getting up his production. 1-1 on the way for FanTaSy, so he is looking to get an upgrade lead here. I believe that would have been the Reaper diving in there towards the natural. So far no damage has been done, just a Marine lost. No, FanTaSy not really finding too much so far here with this 2-on-1. Usually you want to be trading just a little bit because your stim bio trades so effectively, as long as you're not losing a medivac or anything. FanTaSy now going to be moving in towards the center here. Picks off a creep tumor. That's nicely done. We'll see if he scans. He's going to get that done. Maybe get an overlord. Nicely done there. Now going to trade versus some of these Marines. Needs to get out, though. Eating a lot of damage on one of the medivacs. So the siege tank count is building back at home for FanTaSy, but he is on 2 bases this time. Now, a 2-base push on Dreamcatcher is nothing uncommon for Terrans. FanTaSy getting a nice little trade there, picking off a few lings, really for nothing. Needs to get out of there with the medivacs, though. Oh, he may lose one of the medivacs. Oh, it was so close. Okay, I think he needs to go home with that one. Oh, but he's actually not gonna. He's playing so bold. All it takes is really one more queen shot, and that medivac is done. FanTaSy going to be moving out, carrying these siege tanks in this medivac. And he's pretty much going to be trying to kill SortOf here. I mean, SortOf, he's got banelings. He's going to have baneling speed on the way, but FanTaSy will have an upgrade lead here. He doesn't have combat shield, nor does he have it started, though, so he's very committed to this. He's really going to rely on the siege tanks right now. Needs to be careful not to lose that extra medivac. The healing power is very important there. He really needs to poke forward a bit more. The creep is receding. He's got these tanks in a very nice position, but he does want to trade right now. He's getting up a 3rd CC, but he doesn't have combat shield. Does he know that he forgot combat shield? I mean, he's got a bear tech lab. There we go. It starts right as I click on it. But FanTaSy, I don't think he's going to be going for a big fight or a big trade. He's actually going to retreat home, realizing that he can't get too much done. An intended counterattack does get cleaned up there. It's a bit of a dance around Dreamcatcher right now. FanTaSy is moving down south now, actually. A Ling counterattack going to be moving out for SortOf right now. There's a few units back at home for FanTaSy. And the wall is up, so he's going to be safe in that regard. Oh, the depot actually lowers. It's a nice choke point, though, and there we go. FanTaSy is paying attention. Gonna get back, chase those units down. Now, FanTaSy doesn't have combat shield, so he can't really fight until that's finished. He's got his 3rd base on the way. Things are gonna go down as they try and deny that base. So FanTaSy's 3rd is a little bit late, but he did force SortOf to be making a lot of units. If you look at the worker count, it's relatively even here. And you can tell SortOf has a lot of units because he's a Zerg player who's trying to go for counterattacks, and he made those units to defend. Why not try and use them to be offensive as well? He's now getting up his 4th base. Well, got up his 4th base. So SortOf's in quite a decent situation, not a massive lead or anything like that. FanTaSy has kept on with his upgrades though, so he will have an upgrade lead for a time. Wing run by being shut down there. FanTaSy moving out, he's now got combat shield. Gonna have 2-2 in just a moment. I mean, he's got a lot of Marines. Really no Marauders, though, so he's gonna have to be so careful when taking a fight like this. Stepping onto creep. He's gonna try and split these Marines, or is he just gonna kite back? He needs to be so careful. There's siege tanks in position to help trade with this, but he just needs to keep on running. Some of those Marines so in the red. Now the attack moving in at the natural. The depot gets raised, but now the 3rd base is gonna be under fire. There's so many banelings heading towards that natural base there. The SCVs could be in a lot of trouble. FanTaSy returning home, however, he may be getting sandwiched here by SortOf as these banelings are coming in from the behind. FanTaSy needs to kite back, beating so many banelings. They're not moving his army. 15 SCVs going down in total. And SortOf taking a massive trade with all those banelings there. That was absolutely brutal. FanTaSy's tanks weren't quite in position. He sort of just got disjointed into pieces that SortOf could manage. Very well done by SortOf there. FanTaSy now reset, well, getting his SCVs back to work. He's got to rebuild this wall. He actually lost an engineering bay, but his 2-2 was finished up, so he'll still have that going for him. He's got a slight upgrade lead for now. Infestation Pit is on the way for SortOf, so we'll see what he's going to do with that. If it is just for the hive. FanTaSy did make his 4th base while all this was going on, so he can try and expand another Ling run by for SortOf his plan. Now that natural is wide open there. So FanTaSy's going to have to react to this. These siege tanks under a lot of trouble right now. So far, 2 have gone down. Make that 3. Massive pickoff for SortOf there with just a handful of lings. And FanTaSy's situation is kind of getting worse and worse right now. I believe he had a drop somewhere out on the map. There we go. He's got a Medivac moving down south. But he needs a lot of damage if he's going to come back into this game. He never broke down those rocks either. Picks off those lings, which is nice. He's now moving to secure his 4th base. But SortOf has held on and managed to keep the pressure off him. Liberator harassment going to be moving out. This Medivac drop is moving out. SortOf's getting towards his 5th base, so the map is being spread in creep very well by SortOf. And now we're seeing a massive ling counterattack going to be coming here. A lot of Banelings morphing. That Liberator sees it. Now the Hydras are here with this FanTaSy deciding to pull back, which I think is the right call as he cannot manage this army. He breaks down those rocks. Doesn't want to be surrounded. Now he's going to pull back. SortOf is going to be moving in. We'll see if he suspects this, that this base is retreated. For now, a nice drop for FanTaSy getting on top of this. Maybe going to be able to pick off the Queen a few drones. A Hydra rallied will go down. There's not quite enough reinforcements here. Lings do react to this, though. Now, the Liberator was somewhere, but I believe that went down. 4 drones have fallen. The Medivac goes down, so a bit of a pullback from SortOf as FanTaSy gets that harassment done. FanTaSy now feeling confident enough to secure this base, and that isn't that big of an army for SortOf. FanTaSy now also going to have his +3 attack in just a second here. However, this fight is actually occurring before that, but SortOf knows he can't commit there. Those lings were getting absolutely shredded. Viper is on the way here, so it's going to be able to abduct some units or cast blinding clouds right now. FanTaSy has solidified though once more, but the later game Zerg is still a bit of a threat. But FanTaSy already getting up to Ghost Academy, being prepared for that. We're now seeing a 1-2 punch coming out of SortOf right now. A siege tank was in position. Liberators are getting sieged up. Most of these Banelings will go down. 5 SCVs have fallen, but with those Banelings gone, SortOf does have to pull back. The Liberators sieging up, just helping clean that up, and FanTaSy taking a bit of damage, manages to hang on though to live another day. Their sensor tower's up now though, so it's going to be tough for SortOf to get a nice surprise on FanTaSy, as FanTaSy now sort of catching on to this, it seems. But with the Vipers, it looks like that we could be seeing a strong attack come in. I believe that's going to be 4 Vipers out for our Swedish Zerg. Medivac drop going to be moving out. Drops are very risky when there's Vipers and Hydras out, but FanTaSy feels he needs to get something done as opposed to sitting back, and I think I agree there. Ghosts are on the way, so he's reaching his higher tech army. However, for now, it is just Hydraling Bane for his opponent. And Ghosts can be picked off very easily by this composition. FanTaSy needs to be careful, though. He's pulling back to this planetary fortress. SortOf just lurking in the shadows like a shark. Siege tanks getting set up in these positions. We're now seeing another attack on the 3rd base, though. Vipers got into position. SCVs going down in high numbers. 14 SCVs have fallen. However, this army is mainly undefended now. The Stim Bio is chasing after it. However, it's very over-stimmed here. FanTaSy is now moving forward, cleaning up this creep. This Bio is so red. Medivac's coming to heal it up now. FanTaSy may scan again to clean up some of this creep that's on his doorstep. We're seeing a big drop here from FanTaSy, though. Trading with these Hydras is very nice. Maybe able to pick off a Viper or 2 for now, though. He is being surrounded by these lings. Going to try and get out. We'll see if the Vipers abduct. No, they do not. Now seeing this army of FanTaSy on the front being pushed back. But so far, FanTaSy is holding on with his 4 bases. I mean, he eventually is going to need to secure a 5th base at some point. I guess he's maybe going to have to try and push out. And I mean, it's really tough to take a 4th base. I mean, he can try and take this, but then SortOf's attacks will be able to hit the north even stronger. So we'll just have to see how this is going to work out. And I mean, you can move in further on the map to try and sort of place your flag and make your claim and force your opponent to play around you. However, it's going to be very tough for FanTaSy to secure another base. He is building a CC down here, though. These Medivacs do see this attack moving in, so FanTaSy is aware of that. It's just some Liberators, a siege tank. Oh, those 2 Medivacs do go down. That's a pretty big loss there. SortOf is maxed out. He's going into a greater spire. These Liberators are in position. They all get abducted, though. The Ghosts are there, but there's not really anything to support them. Where is the support for the Ghosts? It's on the wrong side of the rocks. That's where. These Ghosts are now going to cloak. We'll see if SortOf manually detonates those. Banelings do get killed off. 15 SCVs falling once again, and oh, this massive attack from SortOf trapping the army of FanTaSy there. Those Ghosts, just without any support, was looking to be a very scary situation there. Snipes going down on some of these units here. But that's really a consolation prize for FanTaSy. Taking that damage, his 4th base was cancelled. And we're seeing a situation similar to the last game. Or similar to game 1. No, game 2, pardon me. Yeah, it's the last game. Similar to the last game, FanTaSy is going to be in a lot of trouble. As he's not taking a 5th base, SortOf is really taking the map here. And now here comes in this large attack once more. There's not much AoE to deal with this. Ghosts are not good versus Lingbane Hydra, and now that's pretty much all FanTaSy has. He's kiting back. He's got a few Liberators over those have been abducted. The CC going to go down. These Ghosts kiting back. But FanTaSy does not want to lose these expensive units, but he doesn't really have anything else to fight with. He's got 1 or 2 siege tanks he can pull back to, but his natural is now going to be ransacked. His production is not enough, and I think SortOf is going to be taking a 2-1 lead in this series here. FanTaSy kiting back with these Ghosts. There's just too many Banelings, though. The planetary, massive Baneling connections on all the SCVs there. Our Korean Terran is all but dead here. Snipes going down. Once again, a consolation or prize. Look at the supply here. I mean, if FanTaSy had a bit more resources to rebuild this army, these Ghosts are all so expensive, but there's just not enough. Some Marines are coming in. I mean, he's taking good fights for now, but SortOf can really afford to throw away these units, and once he solidifies a bit more, makes some more Hydras, a few more Banelings, I'm pretty sure that's going to be a dead FanTaSy. FanTaSy doesn't really have much of an income at all at this point. 300 minerals a minute is not much. He's even floating his main base towards the 3rd base location. I mean, yeah, it's going to keep him alive a little longer, but if he hasn't been able to hold on, he's done no damage to SortOf. He's got these Ghosts. Yes, they're low on energy, though. And it's tough to fight a Zerg who's just so overwhelming here. SortOf almost maxed out here. He's got the Infestors. I don't know how much those will help. They can always get fungal growths off on the army, but really whatever SortOf attacks with, if he has enough of it, he's going to win the game. I mean, there's more Ghosts than Marines, so any trade is going to certainly be in the favor of SortOf here. Lots of Liberators are set up at this 3rd base. So, I mean, it's possible that SortOf could overcommit. He doesn't have any Vipers with this army. He's only got 10 Hydras, but the Queens are here. FanTaSy is really just boxed in here. He's making a Widowmine. I'm not sure. Yeah, I guess that will help with the AoE, with the Banelings and whatnot. So many Banelings just finished morphing. Here come in some Vipers. And with this, I think these Liberators are going to get abducted, and SortOf is going to A-move his way to victory. Queen's even moving in to tank the shots here. We now see the Vipers are going to come in. They're going to abduct these Liberators. FanTaSy doing his best to spread. He gets an EMP off, but there's not enough on the ground to kill this army here. Ghosts are splitting to the best of their ability. They're cloaking. A Widowmine even comes forward. There's Overseers, though, so it looks like these Ghosts will go down. A lot of Snipes can go down on this. Wait, hold on. No way. FanTaSy's surviving still. Oh my gosh. Alright, now I'm looking like I should have shut up there, but FanTaSy does manage to hold on. He keeps his Ghosts alive, and he's making more. 16 Ghosts are still alive. I may have to eat my words here, but I was pretty convinced FanTaSy was dead there. However, he may actually be dead now with an overcommitment. Medivac's going to want to save these units. He's got a good chunk of bio coming forward, though. But look at this. There's got to be too much for SortOf at this point. He's managed to hold on long enough, but there goes all the Ghosts going down. GG gets called. I mean, FanTaSy managed to take that fight, but then stepping out, he was just killed. SortOf had quite the lead at that point in the game. So now, if we want FanTaSy to go to the finals, he's gonna have to pull it back together. FanTaSy losing Dreamcatcher. The next map is now Parasite. And we saw how well that went for Solar, so we'll just have to see what SortOf's able to do on this map. We're going to be getting on into the game. Thanks to everyone for tuning on in. Getting both these guys in the lobby. We're going to have to see, is FanTaSy going to be able to hang on? Getting both these guys ready, and then we'll be moving forward. I mean, FanTaSy is going to have to work to come back in this game. And here we are, loading on into the game. Alrighty, it's a best of 5. Currently up 2-1, spawning down the bottom right hand. That Korean practice is paying off. It's sort of. And his opponent spawning up the top left-hand side of the map. It is FanTaSy. Now, it's been a little rough for SortOf. I mean, he's a very good player. They call him Mr. Mechanics. He's had some very close series with some tournament champions. Dating back since like 2016, he's been having close matches with people who'd go on to win tournaments. So, SortOf, I mean, he's definitely got the stuff. He hasn't necessarily had a huge tournament run, but he is showing that he's very solid here. Making me look forward to seeing him at WCS Montreal. Now, as far as the build goes, it's a hatchery first. On a map this big, that's not very surprising. We'll see what FanTaSy is going to do. I mean, he opened with the 2-on-1 last game, but didn't really get too much done with it. And from there on, sort of managed to take the game. Well, I mean, it wasn't that simple. Sort of managed to hold on from the harassment to eventually move out, go for multiple attacks. Eventually, FanTaSy crumbled. Reaper is on the way. SCV Scout moving out again for FanTaSy, so playing it safe. Command Center going to be going up. Glad to see I'm not the only person when playing Terran that afraid of those Ling run-bys when you move out with the Reaper, so FanTaSy going for that. Losing a bit of mining doing that, but I guess it's worth the peace of mind in his eyes. So that SCV gonna be moving on in. Sees the hatchery, ends up pulling back. Marine gonna work away on this Overlord. It should be able to get to a safe spot. There it is. It's possible that if an SCV goes there, it'll give the vision. Will it? That's a good question. Will it give the vision? For now, though, FanTaSy is pretty occupied trying to deny this base. Once again, does manage to block the drone there, so it's forced to retreat to the Queens. FanTaSy doesn't quite get it, though. Queens are knocked back there. Third base being denied for a short time. Looks like that Reaper may go down. FanTaSy just paying attention, though. I would be curious to see. I get the feeling if an SCV stood here, or a unit stood here, that FanTaSy would be able to shoot that Overlord from the high ground. Well, that the SCV could give that vision.
Command center upgrade
It's hard to know.
complete.
I think it may.
Ready to raise some hell.
Just barely, and that would be enough to force it off the ledge. That's something that's worth testing. That's the little things that got to be found out on maps like this. Reaper and Hellions coming in, working away on this Queen. Bit of creep spread being denied. This Overlord's going to dive on in, sacrifice his life. It was already bruised a bit, but it should get in and get the scout off. FanTaSy going to be going for that third CC once again, it looks like. Started the stim, getting out the Liberator. Now we'll see if he can get any damage done late game number 1. Either way, we are definitely having a series here. Hellions poking in. Looks like a Queen did go down there. Nicely done by FanTaSy. Taking a bit of damage on those units. A Liberator is moving on out for FanTaSy. Double eBay on the way, got the third on the way, so this will be a longer game now. This is a larger map, so Zergs generally will be pretty happy on this. Taking the 5th base might be easier for FanTaSy, unlike in other games on this map. But we'll just have to wait and see. As we will be having another long one here, and thanks to everyone for tuning on in. Lots of great StarCraft. These Hellions, keeping that map control for FanTaSy. Hellions poking in once again, denying a bit of creep there, getting on out. Stim pack is done. It'll be a while before FanTaSy's production is really up, though he's getting out some medivacs, so he will be able to go for a drop at some point. I'd like to see him flip that third right away, and he's going to do that. Some Terran players wait a little bit because they're scared of the Zerg, but sort of not really shown any hyper-aggression or anything like that this series. So FanTaSy very comfortable to do that. Creep spread just going out, but FanTaSy trying to keep sort of on his toes with these Hellions. Double medivac going to be moving on out. Siege tank moving towards the 3rd base there. FanTaSy trying to make this biostyle work once again. Parasite, it could be a little tough. He's getting up to 5 bases right now. Would this medivac drop, FanTaSy may be planning to go for a bit of a 1-2 with these Hellions. Medivac unloading towards the 3rd base of SortOf. Going to be getting a bit of damage done here. Drones are forced to pull. A few drones go down. He can now trade a bit. Fighting here and then load off into the main base. These Hellions haven't dived on in anywhere. They're just busy fighting the Queens. SortOf now, or FanTaSy just trying to use this positioning. Lings are in position though. May get a Queen, but then we'll have to get out. He needs to be careful though. So a bit of damage, but nothing major. 3rd base is on the way up for FanTaSy. He's getting this wall. Wants to be safe in that regard. I believe we'll see a 4th base relatively soon. He's got his 2-2 on the way. Moving on out with another set of drops. 2-2 on the way for both players. Hydralisk then is done for SortOf. So it will be his tech of choice again. Zerg players loving this Lingbane Hydra style. A Ling counterattack planned there, but the wall is done. However, it's not raised, so these siege tanks should be able to do a good job pushing them back, and they do. These Marines trading with the Lings to the best of their ability. Gonna get out of there. These Hellions still roaming on the map as well. Marines moving in, gonna stim on top of that Overlord. Gonna have to get out of there. Hydra's getting those medivacs low. So, FanTaSy just trying non-stop to keep this harassment going. He's floating a fair bit of money, though, that should be getting invested into things like more CCs, more tech. He's getting up an extra factory so he can keep up this production. Maybe going to want to throw up even another command center. We'll see where he goes to take his 4th base here. Both these guys got a fair bit of a bank. Eventually they will max out, and eventually they will have to fight. It is a larger map, though, so I think this will be going SortOf's way. He's now got the Hive. FanTaSy may be trying to hit a 2-2 timing. I mean, SortOf does have his own 2-2, though. However, Terran does sort of win out in that regard because of the Hydra upgrades, not benefiting from that melee attack. So now it looks like FanTaSy will be trying to move out. There's no real counterattacks planned for this. He's gone for his secondary wall once again to protect his 3rd base, which is now completely walled in. He's going to be taking the lower 4th base, interestingly enough. And it looks like he's going to be moving out for a big old attack. There's going to be Hydraling Bane to deal with this, however. This is a maxed out FanTaSy, so he's going to be hitting quite a strong attack here. No Marauders or anything in this army, though, just pure Marine tank. Going to be moving out with a drop to the other side. He's now going to be inching forward. Eventually going to want to try and get on top of this base. Siege tanks will be very effective in a spot like this, and once he does get there, it's not like it's easy for SortOf to get a big wraparound. So I would like to see FanTaSy try and poke forward a little bit sooner right now. Ling Hydra counterattack moving in there. There's 2 or 3 siege tanks set up, though, so not going to find anything. And now this 4th base, it's going to be getting sieged up, or it's actually the 5th base, pardon me. However, it could be a big surround coming in from FanTaSy. Well, from SortOf, pardon me. Siege tanks shooting at any unit that steps too far forward, though. It's going to be looking a little rough for SortOf. He was aiming for a big surround. FanTaSy trying to stay on top of this. He's got all his reinforcements incoming for now. However, the big fight's coming down now. SortOf coming in from 3 different locations right now. FanTaSy kiting back. He's got so many siege tanks, though, and he may just have enough. I don't think SortOf's going to have enough to break this. So FanTaSy kiting back, keeping these Marines away from the Banelings. The siege tanks getting more shots off, eventually loading up into the medivacs, but he's going to hold on to this position, and he took a fantastic trade there. And now it's going to be a little rough for our Swedish Zerg right now. FanTaSy is deciding to pull back, or now he's unsieging. Looks like he may be moving forward. He does want to get this 5th base, though. Needs to be so careful with this army. He's making more units, but he is going to pull back, and I mean, he got a good fight there, so it's a little concerning that he's pulling back. I guess maybe waiting for a production cycle, and then he'll go for it once again, but he can't wait too long because it is a Zerg on Hive. FanTaSy, I think he should be securing a 5th base while this is going on. He's getting up another command center. I guess he's going to try and sort of split the map. 2 medivacs rallying forward by mistake there. FanTaSy pulling those back in time. He's now on to creep. He's forced back SortOf's creep by a significant amount here. A lot of siege tanks are going to be rolling forward, though. Now, this planetary should be able to stand strong against whatever SortOf's going to throw at FanTaSy. As FanTaSy is maxed out, he's got a decent bank for now. He's aiming towards getting up a few more CCs. FanTaSy heading towards 3-3 as well. SortOf already there. He's got the adrenal glands right now, and it looks like SortOf might have misrallied some of his units there. Actually, yeah, big misrally there for SortOf, losing quite a few of those units. And now his 5th base is under fire. Viper's helping that get killed off. The Vipers now do have full energy, so it's always possible that SortOf can take a good fight. However, he's rather broke, whereas FanTaSy is building a large bank. FanTaSy in quite a good situation so far. He's moving on in, looking to take off the 4th base of SortOf. He's just reached this strong composition and managed to hit in time before the Zerg hit his stride. Vipers coming in, Blinding Cloud going down on some of the bio and some of the tanks, but FanTaSy can always kite back to even more of the siege tanks, and he can really afford a trade at this point. That last Blinding Cloud was fantastic, though, so it looks like he may just have had enough to force this back, and he did. It was a costly engagement for both players, but SortOf managing to get the Terran player off his back. FanTaSy going to have to be rebuilding all of his army for now. The CC's floating over, however. There's going to be creep there blocking it. 4th base, it's a planetary. It should be able to stand strong, assuming it gets repaired. FanTaSy preemptively doing that. He's got a few more units coming forward with the planetary. I think FanTaSy will be able to hold on. Takes a bit of economic damage done there, but this drop is forcing mining off at this third base. He's gonna try and focus it down. Ain't gonna get it though. But still, sort of, he's on 4 bases. He's getting towards a 5th. So FanTaSy in quite an equal economic position. He's got a good army for now. And he's pushing on in. Once again, needs to be careful with this army. He cannot fight up there. He's pulling back. Where are all of his reinforcements? He's been making some ghosts. He needs to kill off this creep tumor so his base can land. He does do that. Now he's going to be taking his 5th base here. This is a very defensible 5th base location here. And that's why I was wondering whether this map would go better for FanTaSy, as I mean, it is going to be easier for him to secure this 5th base. It will be harder for SortOf to punish it. That's going to be turning into a planetary fortress here. Ghosts on the way. Siege tank firing on those lings now. We'll see if FanTaSy is going to be able to react in time, and he will be. So many liberation zones going down. There's a few siege tanks up at this 4th base, so doesn't look like a ling run by is going to happen here. Siege tanks working away on these lings. Siege tank will go down, but once the planetary's up, basically it takes infinity lings to be able to bring that down. Now FanTaSy on a 5th base, both players are relatively equal on supply here. However, SortOf has just really been remaxing on this Lingbane Hydra. He's got 5 Vipers, not many Banelings though. So FanTaSy may be able to go for another attack relatively soon. He's got a good number of Liberators this time around, 8 Liberators. That's going to burn through a lot of that Viper energy in order to deal with it. He's even got Ghosts, which can land EMPs. Moving forward, does he have a scan though? There we go. Able to clean up some of this creep, and now he's going to be moving forward, moving down south. Another command center was finished up, and he's floated that over, so it's now going to be a 6-base Terran, which is very nice for him. Well, maybe scratch that. He may just be a 5-base Terran as this attack comes in. FanTaSy may be going for a counterattack here. SCVs should be pulled onto this planetary and able to keep it alive as long as possible, although they are just going to run for their lives, but that didn't do him much good there. FanTaSy setting up a Liberator. He's actually going for a counterattack for now, though, feeling that he's got the upper hand, and he may just do. He lost a planetary, yes, but sort of losing one of his critical bases here. That 3rd base was almost mined out, but his economy has not been great regardless. And now we'll see. FanTaSy, I think, is going to just be fine if he can manage to take a successful fight. He is pulling back. He's on creep. Needs to be careful and not to get too caught out right now. It looks like a SortOf is going to be going for a big surround. Liberators do need to get set up. They're setting up. This bio is very red, though. It's overstimmed. These Liberators are shredding into the Hydralisks, though. But this bio, not many Banelings left. May be able to take the fight. Liberators getting set up on top of these Hydras. There is just going to be enough. That was such a close fight. It could have easily gone either way, but FanTaSy does prevail. These Liberators also all staying alive. Not much bio, not much force for either sides at this point. FanTaSy kiting back into these Liberator zones. Now, he does have the better economy. 17 drones went down while all this was going on. I'm not sure where that was, but I guess it must have been a dropper or a Liberator or something along those lines. Now, SortOf knows he killed off this base. FanTaSy floating a base over, but he does have these 2 critical mining bases, whereas it's not that good for SortOf. I mean, his 4th base is almost mined out. He's got his, what would be his 5th base. That's really his lifeline, but FanTaSy's coming in. He's got the supply lead this time. He's got Ghosts. He's got a good number of bio. There's just not that much for SortOf. He's making around to Banelings to hopefully push this back, but he's going to be losing this base, and that's essentially all his income going to be gone. He's got this base in the left now. However, whether that's going to stay alive is a big question. The supply depot wall being raised there. These lings being shown the door. And now FanTaSy, after killing that base, is feeling quite confident. This command center does land. FanTaSy will be forced to lift that off. He may be able to surround this army here, though. I think he is just going to be able to do that. Just catch those Zerglings. Not quite. They do just manage to run by. Now, we'll see. Where is FanTaSy going to go next? He should be able to get the kill move here relatively soon. SortOf's doing a good job holding on, though. Don't get me wrong. He's using these Hydraling Viper to the best of its effect. He's got so many Vipers. The casters really are his lifeline here. But this base was cancelled once more, and the numbers really aren't on his side at this point. The Ghosts are in position there, but I mean, Banelings can always shut down Ghosts, so it looks like we're going to be seeing a big fight go down. Lots of Liberators getting set up. Parasitic bombs going down in this army. Seeker missile, though, or anti-armor missile, weakening these Hydras. Banelings rolling forward, but it looks like there's just going to be too much for FanTaSy. The Ghosts even sniping to add insult to injury there. And now the army for SortOf is being forced back. A lot of the Vipers went down there, too. and there's not that much for sort of Liberators, well, Liberator, plural, while singular is going to get pushed back. Snipes going down on those Vipers, the Ghosts may go down, but either way, this has been a very good trade for FanTaSy. Losing these Ghosts is a bit unfortunate. They're doing the best they can, but they will be forced back. I guess they didn't have Cloak, well, apparently they do, but now here comes some more Bio. It should be enough to force it back once the Hydras go down. There's really just not going to be too much for SortOf. He's trying to hold on. He's got that one base, which is feeding him, but FanTaSy coming in may just be able to kick off this hatchery, and I think that really will be it. SortOf's doing a good job trying to hold on. I mean, these Lings getting a good surround, but with this Medivac support, I think it's just going to be a bit too much. The supply does not lie here. Stim coming forward, Snipes going down on those last two Hydras. GG gets called. FanTaSy ties up the series. We're going to have an ace match here. 2-2 between these guys. What a fantastic last game. 20 minutes. I was worried this was going to be a quick Afreeca world. That is not the case. We're now going to get into the last map, which is a well-known one. It's Acid Plant. That larger map really did help FanTaSy. I mean, SortOf was the guy who was attacking a lot, so much more of the space, sort of the better positioning. It was good for FanTaSy to defend. I mean, if we look at that in contrast with how Bunny played versus Solar, or Bunny was the guy who was trying to attack constantly, and instead it's sort of playing more passive, like FanTaSy did. Either way, it's going to be 2-2. Thanks to everyone for tuning on into this Afreeca world. Now, I'm kind of greedy. Part of me wants to see how SortOf would do versus Solar. Part of me, I mean, I kind of want it both. I want to see... I kind of want to see how SortOf would do versus the Korean Zerg Solar, who's won so many of these tournaments. But then FanTaSy and TVZ, it's always fun to watch FanTaSy. It's just great to see a guy like this playing once more, so we'll just have to see. But either way, we're getting on into the next game right now. The next and the last game of the series. Don't go anywhere after this, guys, because the winner of this will be facing Solar in either another TVZ or a ZVZ. But spawning up in the top left-hand side of the map, it is SortOf. The Foreign Hope, the Swedish Zerg, the first Swede in Afreeca world, and his opponent spawning down the bottom right-hand side of the map. It is FanTaSy. So we'll just have to see how these guys are going to be, we're going to make this work. SortOf could go for an early pool once more. It is somewhat common on Acid Plant just because of the way the Reaper pads and whatnot. Don't think we'll be seeing that though. Just going for the standard Expo. And then FanTaSy, he hasn't shown too much aggression or too much cheese there. So I think it's possible you may just get a later game. As far as the map goes, I mean, this one's sort of similar to the previous one, in which it's easier to take 5 bases as Terran. You just kind of defend here and then defend here. So if FanTaSy does want to go up to 5 bases, it's an option for him. SortOf looking to take that fast third hatchery once again, or maybe scouting for a proxy racks. Looks like, yeah, he's not trusting FanTaSy. He is checking for proxy barracks. Or actually, he could be going for a proxy base at the third of FanTaSy. Okay, SortOf changing it up here. Gonna be mining that gas, but it's possible it's not gonna be for Link Speed. It could always be for Roaches. If SortOf is gonna be taking that proxy third base. In this scenario, FanTaSy's kind of the old man, and SortOf's the whippersnapper on the block. So we're seeing if SortOf's gonna try and catch FanTaSy off guard with this. FanTaSy may... I mean, I'm sure he's faced it once or twice, but it's just one of those things. It might not be in the back of FanTaSy's mind to play like this. He sees the base, and then he's going to retreat. Now, how is SortOf going to be able to deal with this proxy hatchery? It could be for Roaches. It could just be for Queens to spread creep, something along those lines. FanTaSy's base will be finished up before any of the aggression hits. Marine is out. Reactor on the way. So now we shall see. Looks like this Reaper got in, managed to pick off a drone. Nicely done there. Gonna see there's no third base, so FanTaSy is gonna know that something is different. A Roachborn is on the way now. Gonna be timing up as it finishes up with that third base. So it is gonna be aggression here coming out of FanTaSy. Or coming out of SortOf, pardon me, in this last game. And FanTaSy is not really cluing into this. It's most likely he's going to make Hellions. He's not aware of this. If he made 2 Cyclones, he could probably defend this relatively easily, but we haven't seen him go for an early bunker or anything in these other games, and he's not going to in this game. And pretty soon, Roaches are going to be running into his natural, and this is really going to disrupt FanTaSy there. He's got his starport on the way. We'll see. He's got these Hellions. He's moving out. Is he going to scout around his base? No, he's just going to head right across the map there, and these Roaches are going to be coming on in. Reaper runs on in, sees the handful of Lings, going to pull back to these Hellions. Going to be able to clean them up, but FanTaSy's going to have much bigger things to worry about. Does lose the Reaper, which is rather unfortunate, as that can always be useful. Now we've got Ravagers poking on in. A Liberator is on the way. He's going to be trying to go for a Siege Tank right now. Going to swap it over. That is always an option there. SCVs may eat a bile or two. No, they do get out of there. Now this isn't a huge commitment from SortOf. This isn't like it was his first base proxy. This was his third base that was proxied. We've now got a Siege Tank. FanTaSy is forced off his natural. The Liberator's going to come in here to help with defense. There is an Overlord, though, which will help give high ground vision. A bunker is getting up, but I don't think SortOf's going to be trying to break his opponent, if I had to guess. Corrosive Bile going to be going down. FanTaSy, good dodging there. Going to have to pull back a bit. He's got the Siege Tank, though. Or although SortOf is really going to be going for this. Whether he'll be able to break FanTaSy is a big question. FanTaSy is supply blocked, though. Can't really be producing anything when he really needs to. He's got a Banshee on the way. He's got another Siege Tank on the way. Going to be repositioning the tank just barely. I think maybe good to try and get out a Marine for FanTaSy just to work away on this Overlord. Overlord is drifting forward, though. May actually go down. That would be a pretty big blow to the attack of SortOf. If FanTaSy can pick that off, it would be very huge. Ravager's now eating a Siege Tank shot. Now they don't really have that high ground vision, so nicely done by FanTaSy picking that off. A bit of a mistake from SortOf. Now, FanTaSy still isn't in a great situation. He's locked into his own natural, where SortOf is on 3 bases, even if one of them is on the other side of the map there. We see a Spore now on the way to protect from Banshees and things like that. The Liberator counter harassment is very nice for FanTaSy, shutting down the mining of SortOf. I guess the only thing to deal with this is going to be this Queen that's popping out. Now, FanTaSy doesn't want to overextend here, but he does have these Siege Tanks on the high ground, so he wants to bait SortOf into these. SortOf has been spreading creep on FanTaSy's side of the map. It would be nice to see if FanTaSy maybe went for a Raven behind this. I don't think SortOf's going to be able to break him, so he now needs to focus on the later stages of this game. Like having, being able to clean up this creep to begin counter harassment, things like that. He's now got plenty of Siege Tanks, though, so he is going to be able to secure his natural here. Going to have plenty of SCVs to transfer. His stim is going to be a ways off, though. He starts double tech lab. Command Center's float needs to reposition itself there. It's going to land. FanTaSy trying to bait these units in. Siege Tank shelling away on this army here. Lots of Siege Tanks there. It looks like that FanTaSy may have overcommitted a little bit. Does lose a Siege Tank as a result. More Roaches on the way for SortOf. Maybe realizing that FanTaSy's cut the unit production a bit. Another Siege Tank comes forward, though. I think we may need to see a bunker out of FanTaSy right now. Another Siege Tank getting set up. There is a good spread on these tanks. Look at that Mule Hammer being dropped. That's why I'd like to see our Raven, so that all those scans don't have to be used when this creep gets cleaned up. If this creep gets cleaned up. Those 2 Banshees are moving across the map. This Queen's out of position, though, so that's actually a pretty big deal. These Banshees will be able to catch and likely kill this Queen. Another Siege Tank on the way. The Vikings there, too. So these Banshees going to be able to kill off both these Queens, and this is really going to shut down any mining at SortOf's space. The Liberator going to come in to help deal with this. The Banshees now focusing down these drones. SortOf may just go for it. SCVs are pulled because FanTaSy knows that he just needs to defend it. The Siege Tank at the natural is so huge right now. The Viking needs to land to help out with this. The Marines on the high ground. The Siege Tank is going to go down, though, and this is a big deal. The Viking really needs to get in on this fight. Another Siege Tank is going to be popping. So FanTaSy taking a lot of damage, but he's dealing a lot of damage back at home here. SortOf is committed right now. He's once again, though, FanTaSy has been pushed back into his base. He's got Stim on the way, but he's just sort of bled off a few too many units here and there, and being locked into his main base once again is not a good feeling for him. He's killed 14 drones, but lost 19 SCVs. These Banshees are going to come in. They should be able to kill off this Queen. I think FanTaSy needs to go for it, hesitating a little bit there. Could cost him. A Spore Crawler coming on in, but that Queen does go down, and now FanTaSy can begin focusing down drones, really destroying SortOf's mining. Liberator even coming in, going to be able to force drones off mining off the main base. And now, while SortOf, he's really got the most bases. I mean, FanTaSy's locked in on one base is at the 8-minute mark, but SortOf isn't really mining either. 7 drones are all that's left for SortOf. This is such a crazy last game right now. These drones can't really go mining, otherwise they'll path into the Liberator. The Banshee dealing so much damage. There's not much production here. Oh, this Planetary could go, or this Command Center needs to pull back, needs to get repaired. But there's not really many drones at this other base. I mean, SortOf made one to start mining, but he may just have to try and break FanTaSy here. That be his final push. But FanTaSy's got a very strong army. He's going to have Stim Pack, which is absolutely huge. Viking going to force back this Overlord here, so SortOf can't really poke and prod right now. Looks like that a Queen popped out, shut down the Banshee. Liberator's forced back here. Or the Banshee's actually coming back towards this proxy hatchery location. Stim is now done though, so it's possible that eventually FanTaSy may be able to engage this, but he might not have to wait. SortOf overextending a little bit there, and SortOf's just trapped. He can't really get too much done here. Siege tanks are now sieging. FanTaSy's going to push down, and this is going to be stimmed bio here versus just roaches, just ravagers really, and lings. And here comes FanTaSy. Can't really eat the corrosive bowels. Gets out of there, pushes this back, and I think FanTaSy may have done it. He may have held on. The counterattack damage just did so much, and now we have FanTaSy moving on to face Solar in what was a crazy last game there. Very well played by FanTaSy, managing to bring down his opponent there. So now we're going to be getting on into the next match, which is going to be Solar versus FanTaSy. And look at that, we'll just be having a short break. We'll get the players ready. It's going to be a best of 7, so don't go anywhere. And then we shall be back.